welcome everybody to Keeping It True Bayou Pelicans. Schedule release day was full of surprises. With the fact that the Pelicans were going on an international trip this year, you knew some things were going to look a little bit unconventional. You knew you were going to see some things that you don't normally get to see on this schedule. When you break it down, it's a difficult schedule, but it has easier components. We're going to go into what's harder, what's simpler, and we'll talk about how I anticipate this is going to affect year one with Jamal Mosley coaching the team. This is True Bayou, Keeping It True Bayou Pelicans. Let's go ahead and get into the episode. Well, the season will begin on October 21st against the Indiana Pacers. You're going to have a sort of new look Pacers, but at the same time, it's a lot of players that have been there for a moment. Of course, Tyrese Halliburton coming back from his injury. We anticipate to see him return to the league on that night. So certainly you will have some eyebrows and some eyeballs across the league, but you aren't going to necessarily, have the national attention. And that's one of the main themes of this schedule. The national attention is just, it's going to be difficult. If the Pelicans are trying to make a case for all-stars, if they're trying to make a case for saying why, they're one of the better teams in the league, the only way how I think you're going to get major national media recognition is through winning. And that's a very tall task considering where this Pelicans team has come from for the better part of the last few years. You had a couple decent runs with Willie Green, but at the end of the day, they all fizzled out before they could get going when it came down to when basketball matters. And that's after the Pelicans normally stop playing it. Just to be quite transparent here, you have to think 3 major playoff series in almost, now over a decade. It is difficult to get a energized fan base going for that, but it does not mean that the fan base is not there. It does not mean that the fan base is not ready to be energized. It just means that you had to make changes. And, changing your head coach, while it was done so early last season, did make a difference in the short term. It makes a bigger difference now. Jamal Mosley has control of a roster that is largely intact, so the team building aspect will not be the critical component going into this upcoming season, but how you utilize the assets you have is the main focus. So, as we noted, no national media games unless we're referring to the 2 international games that are mostly Spurs home games, but there is technically one designated and there is one designated for the Pelicans, one of each, but France and Great Britain in relative terms to Wemby and his fan base, they might as well both be Spurs home games. So it's really going to be a lot of Joel and AD this year. I'm excited for that. I think that's one of the highlights from a fan's perspective. You're going to have local media covering your team more than anybody else, so it's going to be very easy to, have quality reporting, and that'll, of course, come here as well from Keeping It True Bayou Pelicans as we are back. Fun fact, Keeping It True Bayou Pelicans has never produced an episode once the Pelicans have played regular season basketball. But this could be the year that changes it. So let's talk a little bit more beyond that. You also have the Pelicans basically saying the fact that they're the younger team in the league in many capacities, and the NBA saw that and they said, okay, go prove it. So you have the most back-to-backs. You are tied with other teams, but you have 16 back-to-back nights of basketball. You also have 27 series of 3 games in 4 days, which essentially you might as well say is some evil version of a back-to-back-to-back, although those don't happen as often anymore. But, shout out to Shamit Dua, Fear the Brown on all the social media. He produced a analytical tool which gave a critical piece of information, and that is the net rest. Basically, how many days are you at negative rest or at positive rest? And the Pelicans have the worst amount of rest in the league. that was partially influenced by the fact that you have to go across to Europe, but at the same time, it's going to play a factor in this season. Clearly, you have a healthy Zion. If you have seen the training footage, you need to see new training footage because it does continue to stay the same, unlike what we've seen in a lot of off seasons where Zion does degrade as we get closer to the actual playing date. So far, the footage is looking good. The man is lean. He is working on a mid-range jumper. I think at this stage in his career, the chance to become a multi-platinum superstar is probably gone. And if you can become a solid 20-10-5 guy, and make some all-star teams and just be a good basketball player, that is more than enough for where Zion is at his current stage. Playing 70 games would be great too, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. What this schedule does, in my opinion, benefit the Pelicans is the fact that while the team is young, they are better put together as far as team chemistry and familiarity than pretty much most other teams in the league, with the little influence of offseason transactions made by Joe Dumars and the Pelicans front office. And that's going to be helpful, but it's going to be helpful if the city gets behind this version of the Pelicans. The majority of the home games take place before mid-January. So before Carnival gets going, before all the other distractions go. But what it also means is that the Pelicans are going to be at home a lot while the Saints are playing football, while LSU's playing football, and even to an extent while LSU's playing basketball. With the reintroduction of Will Wade, where does the basketball eyeballs get split up, as things get going? And what that ultimately boils down to is the Smoothie King Center going to be packed early in the year. I'll give you a list of the first 5 games of the year. You tell me how many of these you think draw a big crowd. You have Indiana to start the year. We're going to assume there's a decent crowd for opening night. Then you follow that up with Denver, which is a good draw. Sacramento, probably not going to be very busy on a Thursday night. You get a weekend game on Halloween night against Atlanta. It has potential. With a relatively early start time of 6 p.m. And then you follow that up with Utah. So I take a look at that and I say, well, you can win some of those games. You could probably win the one against Utah, and then you might win the one against Indiana, and then maybe you split one of the 3 with Denver, Sacramento, Atlanta, most likely Sacramento. And if that's the case, then you're 3-2 at home. You maybe pick up another 1 or 2 on the road that you have against very similar opponents, and you're at least even. And that is a big contrast to what we've seen with these previous past Pelicans teams. If you can at least be competitive and not, start the season with 5+ losses, it would be a great start for the Pels. The only thing is, though, and this is where it's pretty critical too, you have to look at it from the perspective of how do I get to the end of the year? And that's where things start to get tricky, because the Mardi Gras road trip is only amplified by the fact that you are going to Europe this year. You take a look at what you see after what I consider the main home block ends. So starting January 10th at Miami, you then take the Europe trip. You come back for a small block of home games in late January, but then you go back on the road for the majority of the time leading up to the trade deadline on February 11th, which ultimately will lead to 7 straight away games between January 30th and February 10th. That's whenever this team has to say we are going to compete for a play-in spot. We are going to, by some miracle, compete for a playoff spot. Let's hope the 9 or 10 is available at that stage. But at that point, if it's not looking good, I'm okay. As I'll be the first to say it. I'll say it now. We're saying this on August 14th. If you have to destroy this roster to have some glimpse of a future at this stage, I'm okay with doing it. If that's Zion, if that's Herb, if that's whoever else you need to move, obviously Poole, Murray, take your pick. It's now time. The effort has been made for all of this long stretch of the Zion era to make a team around Zion Williamson. Now, if you take a look at where Zion is as far as his contract, that's where things get funky. But before we do that, real quick, don't forget, you've watched this far, hit the follow button, hit the subscribe button wherever you're watching us. And also, that includes if you're on one of the podcast sites. We, of course, appreciate you watching. And don't forget, you can also see this at the brand new or hear it, I should say, at the brand new True Bayou Media.com. That is what we're still working on. It is so new, we don't even know how to say it yet. But TrueBayouMedia.com does bring you the latest in our audio episodes, as well as links to video and your major streaming platforms. Wherever you like to listen to the show, don't forget to check us out over there. Speaking of Zion's contract, though, something that we do want to see is that when are the Pelicans able to start thinking, how can I move him? How can I do something different? Free agency for Zion could be in 2028. So unless you make a competitive trade, maybe with a playoff ascending team that wants to take on Zion, I don't necessarily see it coming easily. I think it could happen, but it just isn't something that, to my mind, I immediately think, yeah, he's definitely gone. But you have a lot of other players that are expiring. You have money that can be allocated, and we'll get more into that as we get closer to the year. We're going to keep a pretty good schedule here. We're keeping it True Bayou Pelicans. May not be every single week, but once preseason rolls around and training camp is open over there in Metairie for the Pels, we will take a closer look. Needless to say, the theme is, though, this season has to start on a good note for multiple functions. If you have to blow up the roster, if you could say that we were 20-20, just to put a number out there, if you were 20-20 and then things took a dive, that's more understandable, with the hope that you're able to use your new roster. Considering the new lottery rules, there is a slim chance Pelicans could walk away with 2 first-round picks, but more than likely they will take the better of theirs and Milwaukee's, which is fine. I have no issue with that. But nevertheless, it's a situation where if it's going to be the Jeremiah Fears and Derek Queen show, I am okay with handing them the reins should they show that they have the potential. If this is something to where you're in the 5th seed going into the All-Star break and you have Trey Murphy playing at an All-Star level, an actual recognized All-Star level would be even better, where he gets to have the All-Star nod and Zion has a career resurgency and DeJounte Murray's playing better than he has in his time in New Orleans, that's good too. You have the new coach that theoretically should be able to make those things happen. That's why you bring in Jamal Mosley, to show what he did in Orlando was not a one-time occurrence. He is a man who builds programs, and I'm excited to see what he can do. But we're going to have to continue to look into this. Again, a fun fact, the Pelicans and Saints play 4 times as scheduled throughout the course of the fall. That's going to make for some good days. If you want to have a little watch party, get together, so forth or so on, make a Sunday out of it, because we know the Saints aren't getting a lot of primetime action either. But one funny day that could happen is that the Pelicans play at 1 p.m. on Valentine's Day. And if you've paid attention to the NFL calendar, by the way, great time to go listen to Keeping It True by You Saints. The Super Bowl is on Valentine's Day. So there's a small chance that you could have Pelicans and Saints playing on Super Bowl Sunday. And what a day that would be for the city. By the way, that home game is, of course, at home. So hey, what a watch party. Little Pelicans game, then straight into the Saints Super Bowl. Sounds like it would be a wonderful night to be at the Blender. But that will do it for this particular schedule episode. Look, it's not going to be easy. There's going to be lots of adversity, but we'll be here to cover it nevertheless. Of course, if this was your first time, thank you for stopping by. And if you're back after that lovely hiatus, thanks for sticking with us. Once again, we'll be back next time where we look to keep it true by you here on True Bayou Sports Media Network. Thanks, everybody. This has been a True Bayou Media production. This show is for entertainment purposes only and does not render legal or financial advice. Remember to bet responsibly. Distribution of this podcast is prohibited without the express written consent of True Bayou Media or its subsidiaries. Thanks for being true by us. We can't wait until next time we keep it true by you.